Hey, welcome back to the show, everybody. Started a little late because our guest had to make it from his own show, so it was quite an honor that he was able to. He's going to do back-to-back shows with us. We have author and show host Don Jeffries with us tonight, and I'm talk about his book, Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics. This one is everybody knows the JFK assassin. You know, the grassy knoll. You know about this back in World War II. I myself came from an area where I was pretty prevalent about the internment camps of Japanese Americans, where they're there. So this has to do with FDR, and so growing up in this area, you know, I firsthand experienced that part. But there's stuff that goes back even further, you know, back to prior to the founding of this nation, that, you know, to this modern day. And so one of the things, like with this book, I was really excited to learn about this. And so when going through this, we're going to cover some ones that you may know pretty well. You may actually not know about it at all. But either way, Don Jeffries is next.
Welcome to the Three Beards podcast. My name is Craig, along with Austin and Chris.
Passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century.
Let me out.
I'm afraid that is quite impossible. Justice and honor in Massachusetts colony?
All right, and Chris, how are you, sir? We're on here.
I'm doing wonderful, sir.
There you are.
Wonderful.
That was an interesting fade in. What was that? That was like, it was kind of goes from, you know. Wow, we're just gonna stop there. I said it goes from black to, you know, your business.
I was texting you for the code for StreamYard, but hey,
yeah. Anyway, yeah, he's here. So then we're gonna bring on, and Mark Eddy's joining us as well. You know, welcome back, Mark. How are you, sir?
Oh, doing well. Glad to be here.
And it's, you know, bring you in for that, you know, stuff. So, and then at this time, you know, Don Jeffries, how are you, sir?
Fine, thanks for having me on.
And give your show a plug, since you broke free of it just to come here. So give your show a plug.
Well, I have two shows. The show I just did was the Donald Jeffries Show. It airs every Wednesdays on Ocelli.com live. And Jeff Rentz, who I appear every Monday on his network for years, he rebroadcasts it 4 times a week. It's on a bunch of radio stations too, but none of them air it live. I'm pretty sure they probably, you know, have it on at 3 a.m. or whatever their smallest demographic hour is. And so if you're driving around at 3 a.m, you might hear a rerun of it. So we just had an on-air birthday party for John Barber, who's one of my best friends, the host of Real People back in the day, the #1 show on television in 1980, and the JFK assassination guy. He and I become great friends. So we had a really cool time. I got his son to call in, his sister. I got some celebrities like Mike Farrell of MASH and Shelley Fabrez, his wife, calling in.
Oh, wow.
It was really cool.
On the off chance that one of them's watching, I doubt it. Hey, happy birthday.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, so, but hey, that's self-deprecating humor. You know, who doesn't like that? No, you can also find you on substack.com. It's / profile. It's a little bit here. 215-0057-Donald-Jeffries, or you can also find you at Keeping It Unreal. The blog.
I've short the URL for those now. Substack is donaldjeffries.media, and the blog is donaldjeffries.news. And I'm going to have a website soon, which everything is going to be under donaldjeffries.media. And Tony
Okay, nice.
Arterburn, who produced, yeah, he's setting it all up, so we'll have everything in one place.
Awesome. And so we had you on to talk about this book. This one published in it was 2019, I believe. Crimes and Cover-ups in American Politics. I'm just going to start it off with just kind of an generalized question here. So when you set out to do this book, what was your original goal when you first put pen to paper on this? If you used pen to paper.
Yeah, no, I haven't done that for a long time.
Yeah.
But thank God for computer word processing. But no, it's basically a prequel. I wanted to call it Hidden History 2, the prequel, but for some reason my publisher didn't like that, so changed it a bit. But it's basically Hidden History 2, the prequel, and my bestseller is still the original Hidden History. Because I started Hidden History from the JFK assassination up to the present day, which at that time was the Obama years. So, and a lot of people reminded me that it didn't all begin with the JFK assassination, and it didn't. So I said, well, I'm going to roll it back. Conspiracies and corruption are as old as history, but we'll start for our purposes. Since this is basically American history. We'll start at the founding of the Republic. So I started there and went from there basically up until right before the JFK assassination. It just covered a lot of material. Maybe not as much as in Hidden History because I went probably more in depth on Lincoln and things like that. But I think we're always being lied to. And history is written by the victors, and I think when people read it, they realize that you've been lied to about everything. And certainly the gatekeepers of the past, I call them the court historians. They literally these narratives. Maybe they've told the truth about something. I don't know. I haven't found it if they have. But everything I've investigated is turned out to be completely contrary to what the consensus from the court.
I agree. I would say Exhibit A is the Vatican. Look at the archives down there. But just mounds of documents that haven't even been all this knowledge that's just sitting down there. You want to talk about the epitome of a gatekeeper that's not allowing anybody access to the information. It's right there. Smithsonian would be a next one. They're basically that end of Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark. That's pretty much the Smithsonian. They've just got all this stuff that they've just locked away and just, we don't even know. We can go on for a whole show on that, on that subject. But the follow-up to that for me was, so out of the research you're doing for these books, what surprised you the most? That when you found you weren't expecting this, when you pulled that thread and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, and that became a passion. I loved writing about this.
Well, I love it. I don't know how to write about things I'm not interested in. I couldn't. I would do a very poor job writing a book about math or something. I have to be interested in things. So I love history. I've always been a history buff, especially American history. And I would say, lots of things surprise me, but sometimes, I learn things as I'm researching. And one thing I did learn when I was writing about the World War I era, and I was talking about the World War I protesters like Eugene Debs that were thrown in prison. They challenged that. They went to the Supreme Court and picked the Supreme Court and said, you can't do this. It's our right to, and this is very relevant to today because, they were challenging, what do you mean? We have our First Amendment rights here. We have a right to peaceably assemble. To protest this, and that's what they were doing. And Woodrow Wilson and the government said no, and threw him in jail. And they went to the Supreme Court. The great liberal, and you'll notice in a lot of my work, I don't have much love for people they call liberal because they're usually the antithesis of liberal. Oliver Wendell Holmes has a great reputation as a liberal, and he's not a liberal. And he wrote the decision on this. And basically, I didn't know that that's where the expression "you can't yell fire in a crowded theater" came from. I didn't know that. This was circa 1918-ish. Yeah, circa 1918. So keep in mind, this is, these were people that were protesting the war. So Oliver Wendell Holmes, great jurist, fantastic liberal, eugenicist, like they all are, virtually all these. But every one of them. And he writes in there, well, you hit free speech, but you don't have the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. And as I pointed out many times, however you look at it, Eugene Debs and the other people protesting World War I were not yelling fire in a crowded theater. So what did that tell Americans? Put a giant asterisk on free speech And it also used, not even flawed, just a ridiculous analogy that has, protesting war has nothing to do with yelling fire in a crowded theater. But that's where that came from. And ever since then, the idiots out there, and they are idiots because they don't know history, they'll parrot that phrase, you can't go fire in a crowded theater. Well, do you know where that comes from? And nobody, I didn't know until I wrote this book. Nobody knows where it comes from. It makes no sense. And it's very important today because you still have people, I argue about free speech all the time, so I'm a free speech purist. And, people say, well, free speech doesn't cover hate speech. First of all, what is hate speech? Who determines what hate speech is? You? Because hate is a human emotion. We all hate things, and it's also in the eye of the beholder. So once you put that caveat on it, you're restricting free speech again. But again, go back to 1918, they put the big asterisk on it then when they said you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. So if protesting war is yelling fire in a crowded theater, they could literally claim anything was yelling fire in a crowded theater.
Yeah. And back then, right then, wasn't it still the classic definition of liberal? Because most people have it as leftist. But back then, the actual definition of liberal was libertarian, which, like what I profess to be. Whereas they were actually, it wasn't so much that they were leftist in thought, that they were more actually, like you said, the actual part of the freedoms.
Right. The definition, I think the classical definition of liberal is, someone who is a do-gooder. I consider myself, I'm a populist, but I'm a classical liberal too. And I still consider myself a do-gooder. I see wrong and I want to do something about it. I want to protest it or try to expose it. And that's what liberals, going back to, Thomas Jefferson, I think the classic liberal of America, but, he also said that government is best which governs least. So it's very libertarian type of thought. But, liberals believed in civil liberties. I was a card-carrying member of the ACLU as a teenager, back when it used to care about civil liberties. Now they don't care at all about civil liberties, not at all, even though they're called the American Civil Liberties Union. And so I'm constantly stressing free speech. That's what liberals should do, but liberals today don't believe in free speech. I've not encountered one who does. They literally, if they disagree with somebody, they don't think you should be able to say. If it offends them, they don't want you to say it. And you can't have free speech like that because it means nothing. We all agree. We all support the right of anybody to say something that we agree with. That's nothing, right? But if it takes, a certain type of person to say, as Patrick Henry did, one of my favorite founding fathers, and I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to my dying day your right to say it. Exactly. So that's what I try to do all the time. But nobody, I know I'm going against the grain because free speech it's not very popular anymore. The right now is supporting it because they're the ones that are being hammered on social media and stuff. But I think if they were in power, it would revert back to the way it was when I was a teenager, where the right was the one censoring books and wanting to, not have certain movies out. They were the censors of those days. So I think it's whoever has the power. And right now the left has a firm grip on the culture. So they're controlling that. But I think if the right did gain, I think you would see them banning things as well.
Well, I've talked to Chris, many times. I'm like, when it comes to like speech, I don't think anybody should be censored because it's one of those, if somebody wants to be a racist, if somebody wants to do these things, let them speak because then you know who not to hang around with. Right. It's just, that's the easiest way. It's like, let people speak. And especially like everybody's freaking out about Twitter right now. It's one of those things. The biggest thing is if you don't like Donald Trump, scroll. Scroll through it. You don't have to sit here and read it. You can just keep scrolling. You can hit block. Because you have the right to say something doesn't mean everybody has to read it. Block, and then you don't have to see it.
And again, the roles have changed so completely. When I was a young kid, this is what the argument of the left was. The left that I gravitated to was, well, you don't have to watch it. You don't have to, if you don't like the nudity or whatever, you don't have to watch it. And the right was incensed that it was on the air. Now it's the things have completely flipped, but it's the same mindset where, because Donald Trump's stupid tweets are irritating them or whatever, some kind of thing like that irritates them. They don't want it there, and it triggers them. They're all upset because some of these people that were banned from Twitter, maybe coming back. It's like, again, you don't want, why don't you, I would have more respect for them if they just came out and said, we don't believe in free speech. No, you can't have free speech, because that's what they're saying. But they're acting like they as long as so you can say, if it's a transgender type of thing or whatever, you can say the most ridiculous, impossible thing imaginable, and they support it because it's, it's part of that agenda. But if you say something, sensible, like, well, no, only women can have babies, then you're canceled. I mean, it's crazy.
I always go to the Monty Python, who was way behind, ahead of their times. And Life of Brian, when they have that whole scene where he wants to be known as Loretta. And they, and they go through that whole thing. It's like, where's the fetus going to gestate? You're going to keep it in a box. I mean, this thing was decades prior to even this coming about. I'm like, God, they called that to a T.
Yeah, and John Cleese is one of the few people that are in the entertainment world that is incensed about political correct. Because again, you couldn't. Monty Python was great, and people, George Carlin, people like that, if they were around today, they literally could. That's why you don't have any comedy anymore. They couldn't do their act anymore because, comedy is the best comedy pokes fun at sacred cows and it points out the truths that everybody knows but is afraid to say. Real comedy, the best comedy is politically incorrect. That's what we laugh at. I mean, anybody can get up and say something, that's Sunday school, whatever. That's not funny typically, but you can't do that anymore. I mean, how many? So these I actually feel sorry for these comedians because, I mean, how many jokes can you continue to talk about Donald Trump? Because literally that's their only target for humor now. It's like, okay, I mean, at some point you reach a saturation point. Can we talk about some of these other crazy people around here that are actually in power now? But no, they can't do it.
Dawn, since you were just talking about the people in power are going to control the culture, what's said. When people read your crimes and cover-ups, you show us that we aren't learning from history, and you do a really terrific job of demonstrating what we were just talking about when you basically do a comparison between President Lincoln and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Right.
Could you give us a few similarities in that 70-year period between their presidencies?
Sure.
And we could probably tie some aspects that both of them were fact checkers and how that applies to today.
Right. Exactly. No, you're right. And Lincoln, so many of these awful precedents we see, if you want to know why we're in this position we're in, the primary reason is because the North won the Civil War. Yeah, that's not an unpopular thing to say, but the American Revolution was fought on for the primary purpose behind the American Revolution, the War for Independence, was that people everywhere had a right to consent to those who govern, the consent of the governed. They used to teach you that in school. Well, they can't teach it anymore because Abraham Lincoln and the federal government at the time, they shattered that concept forever because it doesn't matter. Like people that tell me about Putin or anybody else, it doesn't matter whether they're good guys, bad guys, whatever you want to call. The southern states at that point, when they seceded from the Union, they no longer consented, clearly. And Lincoln decided, well, I'm going to push a war that's going to kill almost 1 million people and show you that you have to consent, that this is not a voluntary union. So the entire purpose of our founding was lost after that. So we became an entirely different, there are two early eras of American history, 1776 to 1860, and then 1860 to now. It was completely transformed. And when the southern states lost that, and they had Reconstruction, and so many bad things came out of that era. I mean, you talk about, the entire race relations struggles came out, as Ron Paul has pointed out, by 100 years of awful race relations was built out of Reconstruction, which came out of the Civil War, because that's where the Ku Klux Klan was born. That's where Jim Crow laws was born. All the things you hear still talking about now, it came because of that war, and because almost 1 million people died, and the bitterness it still felt and the way it was fought. And I go into that a lot. But so there were so many awful precedents set by Lincoln. First and foremost, just to draw a parallel to what we saw first in Wilson and then Roosevelt, and even now, is that Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus, and he threw, still don't know how many thousands of Northerners he threw into prison. And literally, it's a parallel to what you see now with the January 6th political prisoners, because we don't really know what they're in for either. And they might as well suspend the writ of habeas corpus there, because they've been in prison for over a year. They've been denied due process. Some of them claim to have been beaten and kept in solitary confinement, all for what, if their crimes at all, are misdemeanors. This is mindless tyranny, and there's nobody talking. There's no one on the left where I was. No, the ACLU, nobody on the left. There's not a single civil libertarian that cares. I think a lot of them want them executed. But that mindset began with Lincoln. Lincoln said, I can put you in prison because you're criticizing my policies. That's what he did. He was arresting people in church. He was arresting people grabbing them out of the bed. His troops would come in and grab them out of the bed in the middle of the night. It's all in the book. I give lots of examples there. Woodrow Wilson built on that when he started imprisoning World War I in real prisons. And as I said, you saw the Supreme Court justified that by saying you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. FDR builds on that and throws, and I point out many times, not only were Japanese Americans put in internment camps, so were German Americans, and so were Italian Americans. They never got any reparations. And I'm writing right now, I'm almost done, Hidden History 3, more from the American memory hole. So I'm continuing this stuff, and it's a never-ending process, but I found out more about that. And not only did they throw them in internment camps, they stole their property. They stole their homes, and they stole their businesses. It's estimated that the German Americans alone had billions of dollars worth of businesses that the American government stole. And when they were released from the internment camps, they never got their homes and businesses back. They don't tell you that in the history books.
Oh no, it's like I tease that with the Japanese. Where I grew up in Ontario, Oregon, there's an internment camp in Nissa, Oregon. And so when I was growing up, the town there's the railroad tracks. The west side was pretty much was mostly white. On the east side of the tracks was the Mexican laborer, groups that were working in the onion facilities, and then all around it was Japanese onion farmers. There's even a Buddhist temple in this town of 10,000 people. There's a Buddhist temple here, and there was so much and that's where, kind of like, as when they were released, they're like, well, here, just take some farmland and we're sorry, grow onions. And that was kind of, they're kind of make a life that way, where, well, some of these people, like I said, were shipped out from California, and brought these things, and this wasn't where they were from. And so, but yet they still made a life of it. It's just, but yeah, it's one of those things. A lot of people don't realize just what the U.S. government does. And then that's when you see these other things. They're like, oh, there's no way the government would do that. Do you not know history?
And this is why we're at where we're at today, because all these things happened, and the people at the time didn't protest. There should have been, hundreds of thousands of Americans in the streets outside the Supreme Court when they said you can't yell fire in a crowded theater over World War I protesters. I mean, that's insane. That makes no sense at all. They just basically abridged the First Amendment, and then when radio was invented, and television, movie industry, they never extended, and what they should have done, that's the only time they should have done, to tweak the Bill of Rights a little bit, because the founding fathers didn't foresee these kinds of inventions. But they needed to have put a caveat in, not a caveat, but an addendum in there, and say, no, that this protection is extended to any technology that comes down the road. So that would be radio, television, movies, internet. They didn't do that. And so that's why you see the battles over censorship on the internet, is because they cannot stand that they can't get their hands on the internet, or now they're starting to. They have for the last few years, but for a long time they couldn't. They couldn't put the FCC. The FCC controls radio, controls television, had the Hays Code in movies for a long time. And even if you don't, the people that own Hollywood effectively You're not. I mean, you have the CIA and the military both that are advisors. Many of them have script approval for anything that has anything to do. So you're not going to get very many Oliver Stone types, but not very many independent movies about anything significant. So effectively, that's an FCC there. So the internet was the last battleground, and that's why you're seeing the social media giants banning people, and that's why the furor over Elon Musk is so important now, because it doesn't even matter. I mean, Elon Musk, I don't think Elon Musk is some kind of a populist hero. He's got a dubious background too, but he's saying the right things. And if he really does stop banning people on Twitter, that's a good thing. I've gotten arguments about, Elon, I said, look, how could he possibly make Twitter worse? Impossible. What can he do? So, I mean, so regardless, so he's, if he lets everybody say what they want, then that's a good thing, isn't it? So, I mean, I don't care regardless of anything else, what else he's doing. I mean, you take your victories where you can. If somebody does, like Joe Biden, I never thought I'd say it, but Joe Biden pardoned Abraham Bolden yesterday, which is amazing. He was the first Black Secret Service agent, and he's the only one that told the truth about the JFK assassination, and they framed him and sent him to jail a long time ago. He's been out.
Yes, I didn't know. I didn't hear about that. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't hear
that. Well, they didn't. Again, they don't report these things, but I was shocked because, and I was saying the day before we were arguing about something about Elon Musk, and I said, look, some of the worst people do some good things. Barack Obama, when he left office, he commuted the rest of Bradley Manning's sentence because he was 70. Then he was sentenced to 75 years in prison for revealing what our troops are doing. It was horrible. But, so he did a good thing. I don't know why he did a good thing, and I don't know why Biden did something good, but I applaud anything good that's done, every little thing. It's what Robert F. Kennedy said, one of my favorite speeches, tiny ripples of hope. Little tiny ripples of hope. You send forth wherever. So, you cheer, you applaud, because we don't get too many victories. So whenever a victory happens, good for Abraham Bolden. It came very late, but, hey, that's great.
Back to the yelling fire in a crowded movie theater. Once me and Craig often talk about this a lot. Once you give up one liberty, they follow. They see how much they can tug on that. Okay, well, they got a transgender bathroom now. Let's just say. Now we'll see what else we can do. Until the final straw breaks the camel's back, and then everybody wants to stand up and protest. It's too late for all that. You've got to start doing that as the things progress, instead of let them take another one here, and then it's like, okay, it's too late. Now we have none.
That's right, and that's why it was so important. Because they let that happen, because they let the Supreme Court say you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, and nobody at the time protested. Or if they did, I don't know who they were. It wasn't much of a protest. And then because of that, then you are allowed to further curtail streets. So you fast forward 40 years, 50 years, and they invent this thing called hate speech. Because again, and people don't fight it. What do you mean? In fact, I see the right say, because they're trying to get like blacks or something, whatever. They're trying to get them for hate speech. I said, no, the concept is ridiculous. When you say hate speech, just because you can get somebody maybe back, it's wrong. It doesn't matter. I remember I defended one of Louis Farrakhan's aides who hates white people. There's no question about it. I love Farrakhan.
Malik Shabazz.
Yeah, I think so. He made this incredible
I hate every iota of a cracker.
Yeah, and he wanted to go. He said, I wanted to dig up whites in the graveyard and do all that. But of course it was horrible stuff. But again, he wasn't actually doing that. So I defended at the time, saying, well, he's got a right to say it, as objectionable as it is. And people just jumped all over me and said, you can't put restrictions on it. And that's so when you say hate speech, then you open up a whole can of worms. It's not free. Hate speech is incompatible with free speech. And now they've made it a kinder and gentler term. They're using more than hate speech now. They're using more often misinformation or disinformation. Again, it's the same concept. Who decides what's misinformation? And that's why you have the fact checkers and all this stuff. It's all part of the same thought process that you're thinking, and it's all really, I wish they'd come out. I'd respect them more if they just called it what it is, thought crime. Because we're talking about thought crime, and that's all it is. You're guilty of thought crime, and our fact checkers have determined that you're guilty of thought crime. They won't do that. So they keep coming up with new misinformation, disinformation, and it's the same arguments. free speech doesn't cover misinformation. What you have a right to be, even if it's wrong, you have a right to be wrong.
But do you
You're gonna.
But with all that said, do you notice that fact checkers only check the narrative agenda that they have? Because like
Yes.
I posted I test Facebook, I test other platforms. Let's just say quote unquote, like you post.
That's why you're in jail all the time.
I stay in jail, but I posted the thing about don't say gay bill. Okay, yeah. It doesn't say that. They should have fact checked that and said, hey, and nowhere in that memorandum or whatever to the state, that bill, does it say don't say gay. But no, if I'd have posted that it said something else, they'd be like, oh, we deem this to not to be accurate, and now you're in Facebook jail for 30 days, so we're gonna hide you. I'm like, dude, come on.
All right, it's one sided, and that's again the agenda is so obvious, and it's not necessarily left and right, but it's a narrative. So that's why sometimes misinformation and disinformation is coupled with conspiracy theorists. People call me a conspiracy theorist, and I tell them all the time, look, I'm not theorizing at all. If you can find a theory in anything I write about, tell me what it is. Like when I'm pointing out something about the yelling fire in a crowded theater, it's a historical fact. I'm trying to educate you on how it came into being. That's not a theory. No. Now, maybe it's a theory to say that, well, no, it's not. It's not really theory, because obviously it's a bad thing. And you can see how history moves, and that's why history is so important, how one thing leads to another. So if, Lincoln locking up people without warrant, without the writ of habeas corpus suspended, without due process, leads directly to what we saw in World War I, World War II with the internment camps, all the way to Guantanamo Bay, the way the prisoners were treated at Guantanamo Bay. In fact, Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, you had George W. Bush's, one of his lawyers, used Abraham Lincoln, cited him as a precedent for the way they were treated there. So you can say, and of course, right till today, when you had the prisoners, the January 6th prisoners, and I'm surprised, and I think that's what would happen if you had any ACLU type, any civil libertarian attorneys, and you don't have any. There are people like me that don't have the platform, but you have nobody that has a big platform that's arguing this. If they did, and they could argue, then you would have, I guarantee you, the government's defense would be like George W. Bush's lawyer. They would cite Abraham Lincoln as a president. They would say, well, look, in fact, using the term insurrection was a term that Lincoln used to demonize the Confederates. So they could say, well, they're just like the Confederates, maybe they'll claim their own slaves. I don't know, but this is an insurrection. It's the same thing. And so they use those kind of terms. And again, the other side doesn't fight back, and they accept too much of it. And it's very sad that people don't, but most Americans are historically illiterate. So, it's amazing I sell the number of history books I do, because unfortunately there's a minority that's interested in it, but most Americans couldn't care less. They don't know their history. So that's why it's hard to point out the fake history, what the lies, if you don't even know what if you're trying to, first of all, you have to explain to them what the fake history is, because they literally don't even know what the actual, the establishment narrative is. So you have to point that out first, and then deconstruct it and show how it's a lie. It's not easy to do, because you're dealing with largely uneducated people, and that's why we're in the mess we're in. People are they don't know their history. They don't understand the rights they should have. So, they basically have allowed this woke authoritarian mob to shout down any concerns about free speech, because if you just bring up our founding, they just scream, slavery. That's all they say. That's the only issue there. Well, they owned slaves, except for Alexander Hamilton. You wonder why he's a hip black artist on Broadway. Well, read his history. He was the banker's favorite founding father. He was the father of debt. If he was alive today, he'd be in the CFR, and he'd be going to Bohemian Grove in the summer, and the Bilderberg meetings. He was that kind of guy, and that's why they love him. They hate all the others, but they love that guy. Why? He's a dead white male too, but he was the banker's boy. He was right on to the agenda even then. Yeah, let's assume all the state's debt to the federal government. He built the mess we have. He was one of the main people, because his side won. Even then, his side, he convinced George Washington and a lot of other people, and the Jefferson side
Mhm.
Didn't unfortunately. It's a big battle for a while, but then of course ultimately after once Abraham Lincoln was elected, it was all over, and since then we've been treading water basically.
But Don, you do bring up that President Jackson was opposed to the that banking system. So you throughout Crimes and Cover-Ups, you are chronicling that idea over a 60-year period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean Jackson, and Jackson, and that's what I say about you take the good where you find it, because Jackson, he's in many ways he's a heroic figure to me. He had a lot of populist in him. You got to love the way he had the common riffraff. He allowed the public to wander into the executive mansion after he was elected. They mud all over the carpets and tore down things and broke a bunch of vases and things. So he was criticized, but as a populist, I love that he let the common people in on the celebration, and he was the biggest foe the bankers had outside of Jefferson, and he also was the last person that I know of. Jefferson was the fiercest critic of the Supreme Court, because people understand the checks and balances. The only thing that made the Constitution palatable, really, the Articles of Confederation was much better from a liberty standpoint. But and a lot of the best people, including Patrick Henry, said he smelt a rat, and he would even go to the convention because he knew it was going to consolidate power. But it was made palatable, and really it became a great document because of the checks and balances, the three separate and equal branches of government, and of course the Bill of Rights, which without the Bill of Rights, it's something that couldn't support either. But the early on under John Marshall, considered a great hero, of course, he usurped power. And he's the one who decided. He came up with the concept of judicial review, which is not in the Constitution. It's not. And Jefferson was arguing right from the beginning, you can't do that. This is not your function. His side won. And from the time of Marshall, the judiciary branch usurped the power, and they were much more powerful, especially than the legislative branch. And then when Lincoln was elected, he became the first imperial president. And of course, the executive became way too powerful. So you had two of the three branches completely out of whack, because the legislative branch has always been the weakest. And you have to choose any of the three to be responsive to the people. The legislative branch is the most responsible, because you can theoretically overturn all of them every 2 years in the House of Representatives anyhow. But they allowed these other two branches to usurp their authority. But Jackson also, like Jefferson, ranted against the power of judicial review, argued with the Supreme Court of his day. But Jackson, by being a foe of the bankers, he was a genuine racist, especially towards Indians. I mean, he did some bad Indians, the Trail of Tears and all that. And he loved war a little bit too much for my taste, and as someone who's always for peace. But again, you take what's the good with the bad. And Jackson was the last really foe, certainly in the White House. We haven't had he was the last man in the White House that could be considered a foe of the bankers, unless you want to include John F. Kennedy, who was apparently behind the scenes was battling with the Federal Reserve like he was battling with everyone.
Yeah, that's that was one of the things too. Yeah, for me, I'm not a huge fan of Jackson, mainly because of his taking us from divine providence to manifest destiny. And just the rounding up of the native tribes was just like I said, you go from being the war hero to the stuff to the end of your legacy as you're known as basically the mass murderer of the tribal the tribal lands. And so he definitely, you can find people on both sides of his camp. Like for me, I mean, I don't know about you, like through your research, but one of the worst presidents we've ever had is Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, absolutely. And Wilson, I'll have more about him in Hidden History 3. I have 3 researchers that I'll shout out to them, like Chris Graves, Peter Seacosh, Bob Wilson. These guys have provided me with so much material for this book, especially. And I got a lot of great stuff on Woodrow Wilson through them. And so I'll have a lot more on that, and talk a little bit more about the Bolshevik Revolution. And I'm indebted to, Professor Anthony Sutton wrote a great book called Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. But it's startling to realize again what lies the American government was perpetrating even back then, because you had, at the same time, you had the Palmer raids under Attorney General Palmer under Wilson, who were rounding up Reds, the commies of the day, and Reds and anarchists in America. At the same time, all of these officials and the big time bankers and corporate leaders, they were so supportive of the Bolshevik Revolution. It's just astonishing. You had one of these guys. Some of them were there on the ground, leading troops. So big capitalism was financing Bolshevism even then. So again, this has been the way it's been ever since, as far back as you go. Vladimir Lenin, who was one of the leaders of the Bolshevik Revolution, he defined so many things. Probably one of his expressions was the best way to control the opposition is to lead it. And we see, again, that started at that time. And we see today, when you look at something like the January 6th event, I mean, how many FBI and undercover government informants were there? The alleged plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer of Michigan. You just saw they actually were a jury, a shockingly intelligent jury. You don't find too many of them. A rare victory in court. Said, no, this is obviously an FBI sting. And so that kind of mindset that Lenin talked about, the intelligence agencies, the American government, have taken to heart, and they've been doing it. I mean, in Hidden History, I wrote extensively about all the operatives that were in the Black Panthers and the KKK, I mean, both sides. And most people don't know, for instance, that Fred Hampton, the Black Panther was murdered by Chicago police, that his personal bodyguard was an undercover agent. Malcolm X, another guy assassinated, his personal bodyguard was an undercover agent. Martin Luther King, if you see that picture of him on the balcony of Lorraine Mortel after he was shot, the guy cradling his head, iconic photo in his head, was an undercover CIA agent. Guy's still alive, I think. So there's, it goes back forever. Again, people, this is hidden. That's why I call it hidden history. People don't know it. And usually that kind of stuff usually gets their attention. I mean, maybe makes them think for a second, but you gotta hit them, with a bunch of facts in a row and hope maybe you get a little spark there, because otherwise,
we'll make everybody's eyes
might lose them.
Yeah, well, make everybody's eyes roll in the back of the head. Like Wilson.
Yeah.
One of the things, like for me, a lot of people don't understand the 17th Amendment was an actual power grab. Everybody thinks, it brought the power, the Senate, it was about the senators. Well, nobody understands, it's really hard to, we the people lost so much when that went into effect, because the senators used to be beholden to the governors. The governors were the ones, they were like a mini president. This is what me and Chris are here in the state of Florida. So the governor of Florida would be like the president of Florida, and he would appoint 2 senators to the national government. At that point, they were beholden to the actual state of Florida. They were to do business of the Florida. The Congress is the one that does the business of the people. Senate was the business of the states. House of Representatives was the business of the people. And by doing the 17th Amendment through Wilson, he took that from being a state power, and he basically hampered the states and took that power and brought it into the federal government. Right. And this is one of the things, and a lot of people don't realize, and this is one of the, and it actually, whether you call it a crime or a cover-up, it was actually a crime for us as a voter, because it actually stole part of our ability to control what's going on in Washington.
Right, and it was a, and that's on the surface, people think, oh, well, it's a reform. We get to vote directly for our senators and not through our state legislature. But you're right, it did diminish further the power of the states. But again, it goes back to Lincoln. Most people don't realize, before the Civil War, when the United States was referred to, it was referred to as a plural. So they would say the United States are. After the Civil War and forever after, now it's the United States is. It's singular. And we went from a loose confederation, and the Confederates took their terminology from the Articles of Confederation. It was supposed to be a confederacy, a loose confederation of that was, come together in a common purpose, but by no means were joined for life. Like it's impossible to divorce yourself from this. I mean, it's the idea that, and it's why Lincoln's argument was so absurd, because it was this we have to keep the Union together. Well, it contradicts the entire reason we became an independent nation.
Yep.
We seceded from British rule. The colonies seceded from Great Britain. That was secession. But you can't make people, and the reason you can't make people believe it is because of slavery. Slavery kills any discussion of the founding. They had slaves. That's it. That's all they care about. And then the same thing with the Civil War. Well, they had slaves. It was about slavery. Well, no. I mean, I go back and I show. First of all, if you judge by today's standards, there probably was maybe 0.1% of 1% of all white people alive that weren't racist in the 60s. I mean, by our standards today, this is the way it was. And slavery existed all over the world. Nobody else had to fight a war where you lost 1 million people to end it if they were fighting for it. And regardless, I think the Southerners were fighting for way more things that were more important to them than slavery. But the North was not looking to they weren't fighting to abolish slavery. In fact, when Lincoln, a couple years into the war, just for crass political purposes, and he was a pragmatic politician, he would do things and he admitted it. When he decided to pass the Emancipation Proclamation, which was worthless, because all it did was free the slaves in the southern states over which he had no power at that point. Didn't free any slaves in the North. His own Secretary of State said, "This is ridiculous. We free slaves where we have no power, and we leave them enslaved where we have power." So it was a joke of a proposition. But Lincoln did it. If you look at his first message to Congress, I think he mentioned slavery 4 times. Entire message. And if you look how he talked about it, he said, I don't think I have any power to stop slavery where it exists, and I don't intend to. And he also said, I would save the Union by freeing all the slaves, freeing no slaves, or freeing some of the slaves. Clearly, this was not, but he decided for public relations purposes, he wanted to get the rest of the world on his side, because slavery was being eliminated all over the world at that time. And he decided to convert this into a cause for slavery. And then few years after that, towards the end of the war, he really got desperate, and he decided, although the evidence is that Lincoln was probably an atheist. I write a lot about this in Crimes and Cover-Up. They erased a lot of history, but he certainly wasn't any kind of devout Christian. He decided to try to convert this into a religious crusade and basically blamed the conflict on God, that this was God's will, and they wanted it. So, I mean, the guy he was all over the place. I have quotes from him from the Lincoln-Douglas debates that would make the Grand Wizard of the Imperial Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan blush. I mean, but again, they weren't all that unique for that day and age. But he was not, the way he's portrayed now is he was this kind of incredibly enlightened guy that was so upset about slavery. And it's simply not true. Lincoln, and I'm writing about in Hidden History 3. Lincoln was known to defend owners of slaves under the Runaway Slave Act. Lincoln defended the owners of slaves many times in court. He never defended any slaves. And so he was a corporate lawyer. His clients were always rich and powerful. My hero is Huey Long. And Huey Long was famous for saying that he never would take a case against a poor man. I think it could be fairly said that Abraham Lincoln never took a case for an entire legal career.
Wow. I had no idea about that either.
I think Mark Dice's videos show that his contestants have not read Don's books. And
I don't think so.
And I think Don's information is just very powerful, insightful. His books are captivating reads.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, they really should be, discussed in high school. And like you said at the beginning of the show, calling the people that kind of like have approval. Yeah, like okay, we'll say Lincoln was a good president, but someone else, let's just put him over, just arbitrarily put him, uh, President Tyler, we'll kind of put him over here, and we'll occasionally mention him, but we just aren't going to talk about him very much. You, you do go through many of the major presidents, just giving them significant passages about what we really don't know about this person. The way they handled something is a little over rated, or it's been biasly covered. My just 12-minute show that I did last night. I really did. I really do like President McKinley. I just for a number of reasons, but one is just because he's somewhat local. He lives near Joey. But my guest did say he's really underrated, but and probably a lot of people don't know a whole lot about him. But you do bring out those profiles and give us the good and bad about the choices they had to make during their term or terms.
Yeah, well, McKinley was one of those presidents who was assassinated, and he had a very aggressive, warmongering vice president. Teddy Roosevelt is, another one of these guys who you want to look for some racists. They call Jefferson racist, and they can't find a racist remark really in his record. But look at some of the things Teddy Roosevelt said. I mean, about everybody. I mean, the guy was, but he's considered a progressive. And the reason they like him, you'll find that most of the high-ranked presidents are war presidents, or warmongering presidents. Roosevelt, I'll give him credit. He walked the walk. He actually, wanted to lead the troops in battle himself. So I'll give him a little bit of credit. That's a little bit better than these chicken hawks. But he was an imperialist. And again, Lincoln was the first imperial president, but Lincoln's imperialism didn't go beyond our shores. Roosevelt tried to build on that, and we saw, if you look at what happened, I'll talk about that in History 3, the atrocities that American troops committed in the Philippines. It's just unbelievable what they did to the population there. I'll have a lot of that in the next book. Same thing in Haiti, under Woodrow Wilson. You're talking about Woodrow Wilson. He in Mexico and Haiti, invented Mexico. I think he invaded Mexico 8 times as president, and he went into Haiti, same kind of, the barbarities that you saw in the Philippines, and they were built on what we saw under Lincoln's troops when especially General Sherman, who was a genuine psychopath, and they basically invented the concept of scorched earth total war policy. And ever since then, American military has never looked back. So when you see these things that are underreported, like the Philippines, Haiti, and then in Crimes and Cover-Ups in this book, you can look. I certainly compiled a lengthy list of atrocities committed by the Allied troops. From bombing Dresden, which is a city that had no military value at all. I think they killed 39,000 toddlers when they did that. So you talk about is that a war crime? I don't know. And in fact, at Nuremberg, German defendant, most of their defense was built on all these atrocities that I covered. That basically saying you guys did the exact same thing, and they had a point. And even some of the Americans admitted, if we had lost the war, they'd be talking about our war crimes. But these are all built on the strategy of scorched earth, total war, so that when then Bradley Manning under Julian Assange, when he releases through WikiLeaks these horrific photos of Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan targeting civilians and laughing like it's a video game, killing a bunch of civilians, doing things like that. while of course, what happened? They're imprisoned for releasing it. They're not celebrated as heroes, which is we don't celebrate whistleblowers. We punish them. Again, the people in charge are criminals, so they don't want their crimes exposed. So, but it really no different than what the Northern troops did to the South when they were going through the South and they were burning property. They were stealing. They had a whole theft. They had a massive theft ring going on where they were stealing property, and I documented in my book where the Union lieutenant that complains about how much General Sherman is taking.
Yeah, I was just going to say Sherman just marching through, just torching everything as they went through.
Yeah, torching everything, stealing everything, and raping. You talk about you want to know where they usually blame a lot of the. They claim that the plantation masters raped so many of the slave women. Well, maybe that happened, but we do know it's well documented that in Germans marched to the South, and the Northern troops were notorious for raping the slave women. Now, I don't know why they picked the slave women necessarily, and said they done. I think they raped white women too, but not as much. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it was some kind of chivalry or something. I don't know what they were thinking, but they definitely targeted the black women. And so you want to go. I think that
I'd probably say ease of target. It was an easier target. For the.
I think so. Yeah, but they did so many horrific things. They did not. In fact, they burned bridges when the slaves tried to join them because they thought, hey, they're freeing us. No, they weren't freeing us, and they would actually burn bridges to stop them from following them. Again, this is all documented, mostly from Southern records, because again, history is written by the victors. So you're reading the accounts of the victors here. But if you read some of the things the losers wrote, it's pretty heartbreaking to read. But again, those stories. It explains why we see the kinds of things you saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because they're the descendants of those people, and that's been American military policy since then. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they actually instruct them into doing this, but you have to be a special kind of depraved to think that rape is part of the spoils of war, and it's not civilized. And again, the South, and I have on the record, Robert E. Lee and all these people, they were mortified at what the North was doing, and they would instruct their own troops, "You're not supposed to do this."
Don, you said in New Orleans, it was that kind of treatment of people was actually legalized.
Well, yeah, you had General. It was Benjamin Beast Butler. His general order, notoriously, he basically said that all the women of New Orleans were to be treated as prostitutes. It basically legalized rape. And again, this was during his reign of terror. They had nothing against the rape of women, and it happened repeatedly. They know it did. And again, I talked about in Crimes and Cover-Ups, I talked about the Allied troops, all the women they raped in Germany and Japan. It was an epidemic there. They know it. But again, nobody wants to hear that about their uncle or whatever. And I'm not saying they did it, but I'm sorry. This is documented. This is what they did. Mm-hmm. It was nothing to be proud of.
No, that's just it. A lot of people look at it. It's like a lot of things in history. It's like it was not pretty. I mean, you don't. When you find out about it, it's like it's shocking. You're like, we did what? I mean, a lot of people. I don't know if it's just because we weren't taught it. I know a couple people have said in the chat room, they're like they didn't know any, a lot of this stuff. And I'm like, there's a lot of places that you're not taught about these things. No. One, because rah, go team. It's like you don't talk about the bad things that have happened, but when you actually find out about these things, you're like, wow, I can't believe this occurred.
No, it's go ahead.
Don, I was just going to follow up with what Craig said is when you were talking about the court historians, they kind of smooth things over. It sounds a little bit like Winston Smith's job speaking into the
yes, absolutely
speak right. And we're always kind of getting the sanitized version of history, right? Or biased in favor of course, the victor, and
right.
demonized the opposition is demonized, and like, how much did like 1984 influence how you look at approaching history, where you're actually uh, looking at both sides of a lot of issues? So you're not a Winston Smith Jr.
No. Well, 1984 is my favorite book of all time. I've read it, know it front to cover, and it's more important than ever now because we're living it now. We're going beyond what I mentioned. Thought crime earlier. Thought crime comes from 1984, and that's what we're dealing with now. Misinformation, hate speech, disinformation. These are all just different terms for thought crime. Basically, they don't like what you're saying. They don't like your thought process. They can't read your mind yet. Maybe coming, but so you're basically you're being it's a crime. Basically, and they want to criminalize that, and that's a very dangerous concept. You're right. Winston Smith worked in the Ministry of Truth, and his job, that's where the term memory hole comes from. His job was to throw inconvenient facts down the memory hole. He would create unpersons, so that people who had done something, he would just extinguish their history, any reference to them. And of course, the thing about this, it's very relevant now, and we're demonizing Vladimir Putin in Russia, and they were our ally in World War II against the dirty, sneaky, rotten Japs and the Nazis. When they were the demons, and then right after the war, they became the bad guys, and then on the left, they became the good guys during the Cold War because a lot of them actually sympathized with him and were, as it turned out later, people like Gus Hall, who was the president of the American Communist Party for decades. When the KGB files were released to the absolute silence of the media, it was determined that Gus Hall had been paid millions of dollars by the Soviets over the decades. Absolute silence from the media. And so these are the things that happen in history. They're inconvenient facts. And if we don't know the history, that's why we don't understand what's going on presently, because we're unaware of these awful things happening. But if let's say they're successful, if they want to go the World War III route, if they demonize Putin enough that we do this, and those of us who know history understand that this goes back to 1898, and remember the Maine, the first modern false flag when they blamed the Spanish for sinking the USS Maine,
the boiler explosion. Yep.
Right, and the court historians will admit now that no, the Spanish didn't do it. But that's how they got us in the war, and I'm talk all the time about us crossing lines in the sand. That was a huge line we crossed because we went outside the states. We got involved in a war we had no business being involved with, and of course that was the first step. Next logical step was for us to get involved in a world war, in a European war. What stake did we have in the war between Germany and England and France? And we had nothing to do with that at all because our Archbishop Duke Ferdinand was assassinated. I mean, the court historians can't even come up with even a halfway logical excuse why World War I happened. It's just millions of people were killed. It was a bloodletting. It was, eugenicists were delighted, I guess, because they called the population. But again, people fell for the sinking of the Lusitania. Same kind of thing as the Maine. Blamed it on the Germans. After the war, eventually the court historian said, yeah, it's true, the Germans didn't do it. Doesn't matter. And then you flash forward to Pearl Harbor. Huge false flag. FDR, might as well have been flying one of the planes himself. He wanted it to happen. And the documentation is everywhere. But you say that and they'll cancel you. Dare you say, because FDR is beloved by the court historians. Again, all those guys, 3,000 people, whatever it was, that died at Pearl Harbor, were died because so Roosevelt could get us into the war. It was a horrible war crime if there's such a thing as a war crime, but people fell for it. Remember Pearl Harbor and all opposition to the war, and you had a lot of opposition. That's where the term America First comes from, the America First rallies. That's why they really hated that, that slogan, because it was an anti-war slogan. And after Pearl Harbor, opposition to the war in America, they didn't have to lock up too many people. They interned the Japanese and Germans and the Italians in internment camps, but they didn't have to throw anybody in prison because they didn't allow any dissent at all. And since then, you can see the weapons of mass destruction, Gulf of Tonkin, weapons of mass destruction. Take your pick. And now, they tried it with this Ukraine thing where they came up with so many lies. Oh, Putin struck a kindergarten. Putin hit a maternity hospital. I mean, there's every absurd lie they could think of. And they had to retract each time because people now had the ability on the internet to point out, well, no, this photo actually was taken 10 years ago, in another part of the world. And so their lies are, exposed, but it doesn't matter because there's still enough people to believe the lie. So unfortunately, I don't have any confidence in Americans' ability to see through it because they've been falling for the same propaganda for well over 100 years now.
And Sharon, just to address what you were saying about the real news channel, pretty much the best thing to do is, like, I've always just used the thing like how you find the center. When I did that thing, you put from corner to corner and where it intersects. That's your center point. Is to look through news and just find the commonalities. When you find something and then you stick to that, because when you can find where it overlaps, that's where the truth lies, and then you can go based off from there. Because it doesn't matter what side you're on. MSNBC is lying to you. Fox News is lying to you. They both have their set of spin. They're going to lean towards the thing. There's going to be a kernel of truth in both of them. There's going to be the story that's had. So what you have to do is, like he just said, okay, this area that's being called a kindergarten, or a maternity hospital. Okay, this was blown up. So find that and now dig in a little bit deeper and find out what is actually going on. And you're going to find that. I mean, I like some of that I currently go to a lot of times is I'll check the Drudge Report. I'll watch Sky News in the UK, and I'll check the Huffington Post, and I'll check, New York Times, and I'll check some of these, and I do these things and I find where stuff overlaps. And that's what I do. But not everybody has an hour and a half that they want to sit there and spend, and see where everything crosses over and, dig through this. And that's where the problem is. And that's where they know that they've got you, is because everybody's is a 2-second click, click headline. They just want to see hospital blown up, click. That's it, and that's what they go with.
Right. No, and that's it's hard to find. I mean, I don't know any trusted source really. I think David Knight's podcast is really good. I've been on there a few times, and I think he does a pretty good overview of the news. My own shows, I try to, cover the events, and when I don't have the hour that I don't have a guest, sometimes I talk. But I mean, it's just, you need to look at these things. But the problem is, what sources do we trust? And that's why anything that's happening in another country, when this thing with Putin came, I said, look, I don't care. I don't care if Putin is who you say he is or not. I really don't care if he's the next Hitler. It doesn't matter. Or if he's what some other people say, that he's really fighting the New World Order, and he's arresting all the Rothschilds, and he's banning GMO foods and stuff. That's, if that's, then of course that would be good, but we don't know because these sources you can't. And I don't know about, I'm talking about foreign boogeymen, going back to, the dreaded Hun and Kaiser in World War I, and certainly Hitler in World War II, and through Castro and Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein. These are all foreign boogeymen. I don't know how we can know the truth about any of them, because the people that are telling us they're so bad are people that are demonstrably proven to have, just destroyed our lives in many ways, economically and so forth. So these are horrible people. You're going to trust our intelligence agencies? You're going to trust our media that is still telling you Oswald killed JFK and 19 crazed Arabs did 9/11 with box cutters and plastic knives? I mean, why would you trust them about anything? They have no credibility. So if they're telling me Vladimir Putin is bad, just like they told somebody like a Gaddafi, you talk to the other side, and Gaddafi was a beloved populist who apparently did a lot of great things for his people. I don't know if that's true, but that's what one side says. And, so we don't know. Saddam Hussein worked for the CIA before they suddenly made him. He was like, a lot of this is like WWE.
Yeah, Saddam Hussein was Osama bin Laden. He was a CIA operative in Afghanistan, prior to.
Right.
I mean, one of these days we'll get the cojones to do a 9/11 episode.
Well, there's a lot there. I'm going back into it again in Hidden History 3, but when you sell these lies, when you sell so many lies again, they add up, and I don't know how Americans, but the problem is they let one lie go, they let another lie go, and they just had the ability to keep forgetting how often they've been lied to. America's really like it's the worst Stockholm syndrome I've ever seen, and we're all like a collective battered spouse. Where no matter how many times we've been beaten up, and how many times he breaks our heart, and we still believe in him, and we think, well, this time it's going to be different. He's going to come home. He's not going to do this again. This is what Americans that are asleep still. This is what they're believing. Somehow, like this war, because Sean Penn and all these celebrities talking about this war is going to be a good one. So they're not lying to us about this. And this guy really must be stopped. Even if you look around, okay, how come our leaders don't need to be stopped? We have the worst disparity of wealth the world has ever seen. The bottom half of Americans the bottom 50% have less than 1% of the collective wealth. Half this country has nothing, and it's getting worse. And so how are we rectifying this? Our illustrious leaders are bringing more of even poorer people in the country. Bring them in. They have nothing. So let's add to that bottom. And it's obviously a situation that's going to blow up at some point. They don't care. We are the world's wealthiest banana republic now. So we have, call it what it is, man. We have an infrastructure that hasn't been touched for 60 years. It's embarrassing. Our power grids are a joke. Our roads. God, Cynthia McKinney, one of my friends, former member of Congress, my favorite politician. They drummed her out of Congress, and I think they thought she was going to be like all the other members of the Black Caucus, and it was different. She fooled them, and they got rid of her quickly. But a couple of years ago, she told me she was driving across France, and she said, I took a trip all across France, and I didn't see a single pothole. That's a first world infrastructure. You can't drive a block here in America anywhere without seeing a pothole. So we have a banana republic, a third world joke of a country. And that was the attraction of Trump. Trump was the first one that was talking about what a joke we were. Everyone said, yeah, right on. That's true. And of course, he did nothing about it, but he talked about it. And that's the problem.
Isn't that how it always is? They all talk about it, and it's like nothing changes.
Yes. They all, and they make promises and stuff. But I mean, so that's where we stand right now. I'm as much a critic of modern America as I am about history. But we're at this point. We didn't get this way accidentally. We didn't reach this stage accidentally. We reached it because of a series of disastrous actions over the decades, over the centuries even. The wrong people always wanted, one of my favorite views, and I know we're probably going to get off here soon, but one of my favorite things ever said was James Forrestal, who was the first modern Secretary of Defense under Harry Truman. He was pushed out of a window up at Bethesda Naval Hospital, first critic of Israel. They claim he jumped, obviously, but he was a good friend with Joe McCarthy, who I feel has been unfairly maligned and misrepresented in history. He told McCarthy at one point, he said, McCarthy, if this wasn't a giant conspiracy, once in a while they'd make a mistake in our favor. And I say that all the time, is that, if this was a random process, if politics was a random process, society was a random process, if the cream really did rise to the top, if good people had a chance, then we see some evidence that good people exist in public positions. We don't see that. They're all corrupt. What happens when you scratch the surface? They all are engaged in at least petty corruption, if not worse. There's no good people. And that cannot happen in a random situation. That's done on purpose. It's done because they only promote the worst people, the people that are blackmailable, and they know if they do get out of line, they can expose the fact that they have sex with kids or whatever, which apparently a lot of them do that are in positions of power. But that's the thing, is that's why I believe when people say to me, you think everything's a conspiracy, I said, well, yes, I do, because we're run by conspirators. They don't know any other way. This is standard operating procedure for them. This is a way of doing business. They conspire against the interests of the public. So I don't back down from it. And there's nothing random about this. It's organized corruption.
I mean, it's easy math. You make $175,000 a year as a Congress. You're there. So when you start doing the math, how is it that somebody that's been there less than 4 years suddenly becomes a millionaire?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I said, you can't. You're like, well, they earned it. No, you didn't. I go, simple math. I go, if I add up 175 times 4, that doesn't equal over $1 million that you've got in your now in your coffers. I go,
Well,
you're clearly doing something wrong.
you could just look at some of the most popular books right now. Red-Handed, Laptop from Hell. It's all about the money going into politicians.
Yep.
Sure, and that's why I talked about disparity of wealth for a long time. I said the greatest problem facing America is the disparity of wealth, and it is very important. But I think it's been superseded now. The corruption is so intense at all levels of our society. The pandemic, the unconstitutional lockdown brought it all out in the open. We didn't know, nobody knew who Lori Lightfoot and Gretchen Whitmer and Rachel Levine, all these horrible people, these monsters. They're cartoon, like they're like Riddler and Joker. I mean, they're like cartoonish supervillains, and they look like supervillains, but nobody knew who they were before. But they've been brought out into the light like roaches. They've been forced out into the light, and we think, God, it's this bad at every level. It's not just Congress. It's not just the president. At every level, the mayors, these are horrible people. And so I think that's the problem, is that systemic corruption at all levels of society, and the fact that no one is ever brought to justice for it. They're talking about, they're finally, admitting that basically that, Trump was spied on and all that kind of stuff. And again, I'm no fan of Trump, but it's documented. I've written many articles. I write for the American Free Press too, America's last great free newspaper. But I've written many articles going back a couple of years about how, we know from the CIA memo from John Brennan that talked about Hillary Clinton. This is Hillary Clinton's idea. She has an idea that we're going to try to blame Russia and claim that they colluded with Trump. I mean, it's documented. The idea that she can't be prosecuted, but Roger Stone could for not remembering some emails, and he had to have a SWAT team attack his house. This is an absurd system we have, and the fact that people like Hillary Clinton and so many others in the public eye, her husband, for instance, so many of these gang leaders, these are like mob families. That's the level of criminality they have. They have a lifetime of killing people, and the fact that they're walking free and celebrated, and you can't get them for a traffic ticket. That's the biggest problem. Is that America, you have so many people. You're the biggest prison population in the world, and probably at least half of them are innocent. As DNA evidence proves all the time. So you have all these people incarcerated for crimes they didn't commit, and you have leaders who are guilty of some of the worst crimes imaginable. You can't convict them on anything. You just can't do it, and that's the problem. Is that they're above justice. We can't have any kind of justice when you have all our leaders are above the law.
Well, the prime example is like,
do you think it's all like a domino effect? I got something on you, so I can't prosecute you because you'll tell what you got on me. Or over here, I got some on this person, so if this person prosecutes you, do you think it's all a domino effect of something?
I think they're probably scared. Maybe they'll name names or talk, but it's also, could be, back when the Freemasons had a lot more power. They had little secret signs that they would give each other, that they would know, okay, that's a brother, so we can't, that's one of the Masons, so we can't prosecute him. It's documented. They know from a police officer stopping somebody, they give them a Masonic handshake or whatever. Okay, you can go. Same thing if you show up in court and the judge is a Freemason. So I think something like that probably goes on. That maybe they have occult symbols or something where they stick the finger. I mean, you think they're doing that for innocent reasons? Who poses like this? And the kind of
you're over there on the defendant's table.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you're posing again. So if you don't think there's a power behind this, a negative dark force, I mean, why are they doing that?
Well, we're gonna take a short recess. We'll be back tomorrow.
You're like sitting there like this, and they're like, "Oh, you're good. You're good. He's innocent. He's innocent." No,
but you said something earlier that went so far. We went so far so fast. So basically, you're right. They suspended. I didn't think of it that way. They suspended the Corpus Christi on these people from the so-called insurrection. They haven't gave them a trial. They haven't gave them a court date. They haven't said, well, what are you here for? Why are you locked up? But they could suspend that at any time, I guess.
Well, they didn't officially suspend it. They don't even have to anymore. They just literally aren't. They aren't going by constitutional law. They might as well have. And again, nobody. As I say, if you still had civil libertarians out there, which you don't have anymore, except people like me, and I don't have any power. If you had, like my mentor Mark Lane, who I worked for as a teenage volunteer, wrote for Rush Adjustment, most famous critic of the Warren Report. He was a civil libertarian. I kind of patterned my political beliefs after him. People like that were around today, they would be making noise. They'd be marching in protest. They'd be demanding justice for these people. But no one is talking about them, including Donald Trump, who is holding rallies and never talks about them and has raised, I don't know how many millions of dollars and has never thought to send some of that money to them so they can hire good attorneys. Doesn't do it. So I feel awful for these people because there are political prisoners and nobody cares, but there isn't, that side of America doesn't exist anymore. Except for people like me that have the platform I have. I mean, people that listen to me, however many of the people that aren't know about it. But I don't have the platform that some of these other people do. I'm certainly not a member of Congress or anything. And that's where you need people there. And you've had a handful of GOP congressmen that tried to say something about it, but they're shouted down. There's not enough of them. Tucker Carlson on TV talks about them sometimes, but nobody else. And it's a disgrace. Because the fact that can happen, I try to tell people, if you let that happen to anybody, just like free speech, if you take away somebody else's free speech, it can happen to you. And if you allow anybody to be kept in prison like that, I said, I don't even care what they did. It doesn't matter. And I don't think they did anything, but it doesn't matter that I think that. Even if I thought they were as guilty as it, you can't have a situation like that. If you're under constitutional law, they have violated their rights repeatedly. They've raped them. Their due process, rights of due process are completely shattered there. You're in prison for over a year. You haven't gone to trial yet for a misdemeanor. I mean, this is insanity, but nobody cares because they're associated with Trump, and the people that hate Trump, I think, want these people executed. And they don't care about rights. And again, that's the left today. The woke left doesn't care about the speech or any other rights of the people that they oppose. And that's the situation we're in. There are no civil libertarians.
Don, do you think anyone has a lower ESG score than you?
Is that social? What is that ESG? Is that social
score?
Environmental, social, and governance score.
I don't know. I would. I'd be proud of my low score. Yeah, I'm sure as bad as low as. And again, people should. That's something that's not a conspiracy theory. You have somebody like Elizabeth Warren who wants to, wants to centralize digital currency. That's the first step to getting a Chinese style social credit score because.
I'm sure Charlie Robinson's up there too. He's probably got a really low score as well.
Charlie Robinson's my friend. Yeah, we've been on each other's shows, and because if you do you really want a situation where you go to the bank? Somebody told me, "Oh, you're crazy. That would never happen." I said, go to the bank and you're sorry, this transaction is rejected because you had some issues with your tweets. Something like go correct that. I mean, that's what a social credit score would do. It would literally deny you your own money. And so we should fight that with everything we have. But again, people, they don't make it.
Yeah, we saw that with the Canadian truckers.
Yes, cancel their bank accounts.
Yes. They couldn't get gas to fill up their tanks, and because they were there, turn off their savings accounts.
And very, very few people protested. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to run in a few minutes here.
We got to wrap it up. Yeah, we got to wrap it up anyway here.
Yeah, I'm enjoying a conversation, but I gotta do something here.
Yeah, so just everybody go to, like I said, we've got that I've been having it scrolling up there, but it's basically what I had was donaldjeffries.wordpress.com is how I got to your site. That's my blog. That's my blog, and it's donaldjeffries.news is easier, and donaldjeffries.media is where you can go to Substack. I'm writing more. I wrote something today on Substack. People want to see. I write regularly there. I have a paid option there where some people are willing to support me that way. But I offer everything for free. So I mean, you can get it all for free as well too. And I write regularly there, and I do have my 2 shows, and
You search for me, you'll probably find out more than you want to know.
And then obviously Amazon, the god of book selling, is you can go. They've got crimes, cover-ups in American politics. This is the one we kind of talked about here. We also talked about hidden history.
And we'll have to have Dawn come back for Bullyocracy too.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to come with you guys. I'm sorry this was just kind of a busy day, but and crimes and cover-ups. I want to mention again that has a foreword by Ron Paul, which I'm very, very proud of. He's a big hero of mine, and he consented to write that, so that was pretty cool. Very nice. Conspiratorial and controversial book, so he put his name on it. So, hats off to him. He's willing to be associated with someone like me. How can I not love him?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. So, Dom, man, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Hey,
I know you got to
my
run.
pleasure. So. Anytime, guys. And usually I'm not quite this busy, so anytime. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll have a great night. Like I said, we'll reach out, and like I said, we'll see about doing a show later on down the road.
Okay, thank you. Take care, guys.
Awesome. Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
And like I said, we're going to shout out to Laura Lehman Porter, our first Patreon. She decided to, there. So thank you. I get. Yeah, I said that's. I was just blown away when I saw it. So I'm a plug. We're going to also be on Sunday, May 1st, 5 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Central time. We're going to go live on TikTok, and we're actually going to be with her as well. Kind of just doing just Q&A, just picking each other's brains. So, but. I just want to thank you again, because that support really helps us. I mean, that's going to be what it takes. We'll be able to make new content like that little thing we have there with the cows with the beards being abducted. Just that kind of support's what helps us make that type of stuff. So, but Mark, what do you got going on with you on your end that you need to plug?
The 12-minute show from last night. Hopefully will be a full hour and 20 minutes or 120 minutes Sunday night, 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern on barbaradelong.com. And that will be looking at one of the books. We'll be looking at the history of National Road and how the road helped people to move west beyond the Allegheny Mountains. Pretty neat topic. And we have some other Pan American Expo and Ohio River flooding. That will be the next show this Sunday night. I had to reschedule.
And M.A. Allen, I don't know if it is like close contact, but it's like exposure. Maybe that's what'll help. If he keeps getting exposed, like radiation, eventually the beard will show up. If he keeps getting these doses, maybe we'll see. I always forgot too. It's like on TikTok and other things. Follow Laura at, and this is I love it. Butt Ass Castile. It's that's her tag. So follow her TikTok. I believe on I think Instagram and stuff too. But you can follow her there. She's actually a really talented artist. She was the one that drew that picture for the for when we did for the Fresno Nightcrawlers. And speaking of that, before we do, my sister sewed this for me. So everybody that's watching this, check this thing out. This is the Fresno Nightcrawler. So you can just picture this from the video, just walking across the screen. So she actually sewed this for me. And so I actually have a Fresno Nightcrawler that I can put up on there. So this is so this is pretty cool. So that's
the picture you sent me did me no justice. I thought it was a neck pillow. He said, neck pillow for an infant.
Yeah.
I thought it was a Fresno Nightcrawler pillow. And I'm like,
yeah, so that's so yeah, definitely. So, but yeah, and so, I mean, if anybody's interested, I can get you in touch with her. If you guys want your own Fresno Nightcrawler, let me know. But yeah, this thing's amazing. So I've got it there. Other side. That side. So it's, but yeah, everybody, thank you again for the show. Mark, Eddie, appreciate it. It's, this is a lot of fun. I mean, like I said, we're going to talk.
It really is.
Yeah. So we enjoy these topics, just every now and then we just got to skirt the thing. And it's like, unfortunately, because we got to watch for the overlords to keep from busting us and, shutting it down. But, so check us out. If you want this gratuitous plug and, groveling and butt kissing like we've been doing, you can become a Patreon yourself as well. So thanks again to Laura, for doing that. Just everybody, just for tuning in. If you haven't yet, please go to YouTube and subscribe there. Help us get to 1,000 subscribers. Yeah, just share these things. We're on TikTok, we are on Twitter, we are on Instagram, we're on the major ones. No Snapchat yet. I can't bring myself to. There's just too much. I can't keep up enough on the ones we got. So thanks for watching, everybody. Go to threebeardspodcast.com. Go to the merchandise, or you can go to redbubble.com/threebeardspodcast to buy merchandise that we have listed there. We broadcast every Wednesday on ERRT radio around 11 p.m.ish. Once Into the Outer Realms is done. Speaking of Into the Outer Realms, go to Outer Realms Bathworks, and you can even purchase a signature beard oil that Tanya Medea makes, and a portion of that supports us that way too. So you can keep the beard in check and and support us as well. So everybody, thanks for watching. We will see you next week. And one of these times, just, you never know, Mark Eddy will pop in and say hi. Good night.